Now, David Sorokin had been recalled earlier in the evening, but since the vote was not, had not been certified, he was still able to vote. Phil Maston, who had been recalled a week earlier, that vote had been certified, so he was ineligible. So that's why it only required 19 votes to pass the plan. That redistricting plan then was concurred in by the State House later that evening, like about 3 o'clock in the morning, and Governor Blanchard signed the bill into law. In 1984, that plan would go into effect for the fall elections, and so I was approached by two Republican state representatives, Gary Randall and Don Van Singel, and they said, we think that the way this bill was passed violated the change of purpose clause of the Michigan Constitution, and we've talked to Dave McKeague, who at the time was an attorney at Foster Swift and actually served as the general counsel of the Michigan Republican Party. But, he says, I got to have $2,500 right up front to begin any legal research on this change of purpose clause argument. And they said, we've talked to Mike Bush, the Republican leader, and he refuses to give us any money. So can the chamber, provide the financing? And I said, I think my exact words to them was, well, we pissed away $2,500 before. We'll try it this time. We'll do it again. We'll find a way. What happened is that McKeague's research said that we had a decent shot. And so a lawsuit was filed in Oakland County Circuit Court. It was called Anderson versus Oakland County Clerk before Judge LaPlata. And he held that the redistricting law was unconstitutional for violating the change of purpose clause. There was an application for bypass to take it directly to the state Supreme Court. That motion was granted. And in oral argument, you had the Attorney General's office representing the state, defending the constitutionality of the act. I think Ted Sachs probably intervened and spoke as well.
Our Democratic
Democrat,
lawyer.
yeah. And for the Republicans, Ted Swift. David McKeague's law partner, just did a masterful job of oral argument. He broke into limericks and danced an Irish jig and did all sorts of things. And years later, I had dinner one night with Jim Brickley, and I said, do you remember that oral argument? And he said, oh, yes, I do. And he said, when we got done with oral argument and we all filed into the conference room, Soapy Williams, the Chief Justice, said, his first words out of Soapy's mouth was, who said oral argument doesn't matter? And the Supreme Court, on a 7-0 vote, declared the law unconstitutional for violating the change of purpose clause, and ordered the APO plan back into effect. Now that had severe implications on that the Republican majority, if they had to go up against that in 1986, I'm sure John Engler would not have been the Senate Majority Leader. And if John Engler hadn't been the Senate Majority Leader in 1990, he may not have challenged Jim Blanchard for governor. He might have, tried to hold on to see if they could get the majority back in the state Senate. So that was a pivotal moment in Michigan political history.
Right. Let's keep on this theme of redistricting. Let's flash forward to 1992. Okay, 10 years later. You've had the APOL plan in effect for a decade at that point, after having rescued it in 84.
3 years before that occurred, however, was another milestone.
Okay.
Dave McKeague and I and Bill Ganacki had breakfast at Sparty's.
I remember.
And there at that breakfast meeting, we, over a bunch of scribbling on napkins, we came up with a new mechanism to help fund litigation expenses in the future. what we're going to do is we're going to form a kind of a soft money 527 organization, and we were going to call it the Michigan Redistricting Fund. And because it was not involved in the nomination or election of candidates, there had been previously some FEC rulings and also some Secretary of State rulings that redistricting fell outside the scope of the Michigan campaign finance law. So we had basically a mechanism through this Michigan Reapportionment Fund to raise corporate dollars, something that really had never been done before, except for maybe ballot questions, and then not have to disclose any contributors because it fell outside the scope of the campaign finance law. And so Bill Ganacki and I, started fundraising for it. David McKeague soon kind of retired from politics because he would be nominated the following year by George Herbert Walker Bush for the federal district court position in the Western District. And so going into redistricting in 1991-92, we needed to find a new lawyer, and we found it in Peter Ellsworth at the Dickinson Wright law firm.
Okay, and then after that, what happened going into 92? And you have a Supreme Court, you have a Court of Appeals with T. John Lisinski.
Well, the most important thing that happened in 92 was that we had divided power. John Engler had won the governor's office in an upset over Jim Blanchard in 1990, but we had a Republican in the governor's office. The state Senate had been Republican since those recall-created vacancies were filled in 1984, and they held on to it by the hair of their chinny chin chin in 1986, and again in 1990. Having Joe Schwartz run in 86 and having John Siskey run in 90 basically provided the margin that the Republicans had 20 votes in the Senate.
20 to 18.
Yeah. In the Democrats controlled the state house, and Lou Dodak was the speaker, and so with divided control, we knew that we were going to have basically the decisions made in the courts.
And by this time, that old-fashioned reapportionment commission from
it was invalid.
It
didn't
was
even
declared unconstitutional.
It wasn't even convened.
So the courts at this point took over.
One thing that happened is that in July of 1992, Ted Sachs filed a lawsuit in federal district court in Flint. There was only one judge that you could draw out of Flint, and that was Stu Newblatt. And Ted Sachs had done that 10 years before. So we had a plan that what we were going to do. We didn't think he'd actually file that early, but our plan is that we were going to file in Marquette. And we thought if we filed in Marquette, the judge that we might draw up there would be Robert Holmes Bell. And so when we heard that Ted Sachs had filed in Flint, we had nothing to lose. We went ahead and filed our lawsuit up in Marquette and did, in fact, draw Robert Holmes Bell. The likelihood of us getting a federal district court judge who had been appointed by a Republican president was much greater in Marquette than
anywhere else.
But what happened is Robert Holmes Bell immediately notified Gilbert Merritt, the chief judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals down in Cincinnati, that he had drawn a redistricting case. And Stu Newblatt had kind of sat on it and didn't call the chief judge. And so Gilbert Merritt basically resolved the matter by putting both of them on a three-judge panel. Statewide redistricting, whether it's congressional, is always heard by a three-judge panel. So Merritt put Robert Holmes Bell and Stu Newblatt, and then he named a Court of Appeals judge from Michigan, Jim Ryan, to serve on the panel. Now, Jim Ryan was appointed by by a Republican president,
right.
And he had also been on the Michigan Supreme Court back in 1982. And so he was familiar with the Apelt standards.
He was nominated by the Republicans for the Michigan Supreme Court, too.
Yes.
Right?
And so we thought we had...
a pretty good panel.
Well, we had a decent panel.
Better than you used to have.
Now, remember in 1992,
Yeah.
Michigan's congressional delegation really got decimated because we went from 18 congressional districts down to 16. We had already lost one a decade earlier from our high water mark of 19 down to 18, now down to 16. And as it turned out, we did okay. And the people who kind of, got left by the wayside were people who got caught up in the House post office scandal, like Dennis Hertel and the Republican from the UP.
Well, Bob Davis.
Bob Davis, yeah. So anyway, and then, also there was the passing of the scene. Wolpe didn't think he could win, and so he didn't run for re-election. He went on to run for governor 2 years later.